Hi, Fran.
Hi.
I am going to introduce you. Um, your bio is concise, but I know, and I think some people out there who are watching know you have a very extensive publication history already. But I'll just get down to the brass tacks for you here. So, Francine Cunningham is an award-winning Indigenous writer, artist, and educator. God Isn't Here Today, which I will hold up. I'll hold up my copy. Is her debut collection of short fiction. Her debut book of poems, On Me, which I have on my desk right here so I can show, On Me, was published by Caitlin Press, and On Me was nominated for the BC and Yukon Book Prize, the Indigenous Voices Awards, and the Vancouver Book Awards. Francine is the winner of the Indigenous Voices Award in the 2019 Unpublished Prose category and of the Hanathishan Foundation's Reveal Indigenous Art Award. Her fiction has appeared all over, including the Best Canadian Short Stories 2021 edition, and in Grain Magazine as the 2018 Short Prose Award winner. She's also appeared as the Malhat Review's Far Horizons Prose Shortlist, and she's also appeared in Joyland Magazine, The Puritan, and elsewhere. She is, as Han mentioned, a graduate of the Creative Writing MFA program at the University of British Columbia and currently resides in Alberta. And of course, if you want to know more about Fran and what she's been doing, what she's done in terms of all of her genres, art, writing, fiction, nonfiction, you can go to her website, francinecunningham.ca. And hi.
Hi. Thanks, Nadine.
uh, let's talk about your book. I am so delighted that I can do this because um, I've been sort of watching you on your journey to get this done, and it just always feels really nice to see the book done and in your hand and in print. And I'm just so excited, and I want to just congratulate you again on doing this.
That's
So
true.
let's talk.
You
Let's
were
talk.
there. Nadine was there. Her and I write daily together. She was there through like all the edits, hearing me like, oh, I don't know. I don't know. What should I do? What should I do?
And I think the long and short of it was just like, Fran, believe in yourself. You're doing good stuff. Don't worry. And here it is now. So this is great. So would you like me to read the synopsis of the book, or
Yeah, that
uh,
would be great, I think.
yeah, let's introduce it. I think it's very well written. I think it sums up the collection really nicely. So this is a synopsis from the publisher, Invisible Publishing. For fans of Chuck Palahniuk, Joyce Carol Oates, and Karen Russell, the stories in God Isn't Here Today ricochet between form and genre, taking readers on a dark, irreverent, yet poignant journey led by a unique and powerful new voice. Driven by desperation into moments of transformation, Cunningham's characters are presented with moments of choice, some for the better and some for the worse. Even as they flirt with the fantastic, Cunningham's stories unfold with the innate elegance of a spring fern, reminding us of the inherent dualities in human nature, and that redemption can arise where we least expect it. I think that's on the mark, I think. Um, I think a lot of the stories are about choice, and I think that's very apt. I think so many of the characters are struggling with just life and various, ailments and just like the ills of just living.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that I believe in as a human is that the only thing that we take with us into the next life is the choices that we make here in this life. And so I think it's just really important to ask your characters to make a choice. And for some of these characters, it's really big, and for some of them, it's really small. But for each one of them, it alters the course of their life.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that was like one of the base, like when I first started writing this collection, that was like one of the base questions that I had, like, what are the moments of choice for these characters? And what are they going to do? Because I didn't know what they were going to do until I finished writing the story.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to talk about in terms of like how you came to putting the collection together. Because I mean, there you are to make a choice, right? To make a lot of choices because you know we, as we know, some of the stories have been published earlier over the course of quite a few years, and you know you had to decide which stories had to go in. So, what was your thought process in terms of deciding what went into the book?
Well, number one, I wanted to make a book that was really fun.
Yeah.
So that was like a huge thing. I was like, I don't want this to be a book that people pick up and they're like, to read it. Like they have to force themselves to read it. Like I wanted it to like they pick it up and they're having a really good time. And then they want to read the next story to have more good times and just like have it take them kind of like on a cinematic type journey. Like it's very visual. That's kind of how I think. And yeah, I mean, like, fun was like the thing because the thing about the short stories that I love, like the ones that were sort of mentioned in that intro, is that those stories are really, really fun and I just like reading them. And I really wanted to step a little bit away from maybe the Canlit tradition of having sort of just people in a room sort of just talking, maybe, or like, like stories about just like the prairies that drift forever and the birds that they see on the fence post. Like those stories are, they're the stories some people really really like them, not so much for me. Um I like
I I
yeah.
think I agree. I think Canlit has a lot of beautiful long lilting stories where people are very introspective and that in itself is great. Like I do love reading those, but I found it interesting that you said fun about your stories because your stories did make my heart palpitate sometimes. Is fun the right word? I think I enjoy, they're entertaining, yes. But I mean, some of these stories really make you sit and sort of stare into the void and like wonder about your life and your choices and just like there's so much truth in like the harsh realities of life and the harsh realities of just like how do I get to the next day when all of these things have been compounded on me? And you put your characters through a lot in these stories, and I think it's, for lack of a better word, very brave. Like, you know,
Oh,
you really do put them through the ringer, and you know, some of them come out on the other side, and some of them don't. But I think there's a lot of honesty in how you write them, because sometimes you really want them to get through it, and that's just not where their story is going.
because we don't always get through it.
That's right. And I think this is a good point in which we can do your first reading. So
Yeah.
to all to all of our wonderful listeners and watchers out there, Fran's gonna do 2 or 3 readings while we're here. And I really will encourage you guys, if you think of any questions that you want to ask Fran about anything to do with the book or writing or anything, please write it in the chat and I'll get to it. There are no bad questions, there are no wrong questions, so please. But I will let Fran start with her first reading now.
All right. So we got the book. I'm gonna start with I'm not gonna read the whole thing because it's a novella, which is like 10,000 words long. It's a long story. But I'm gonna read a little bit from one of the stories called Mickey's Bar. And yeah, so it is the novella in the book. It's a little bit longer gulp of this story. Um, all right, I'm starting at the beginning. Okay. Mickey. The faded navy blue sign that hung above the entrance was bloated with water damage, but everyone in Lily's Lake knew the place was called Mickey's Bar. When you stepped inside, the first thing you noticed was the smell. Like a hybrid lemon lavender tree had planted itself into the deep dark corner and bloomed every night. After the smell, you might notice the lack of dust, the grime that would normally mark a dive bar. The place was scrubbed clean and looked well cared for. Though the furniture was old and scratched up, repairs done by a semi competent hand. The music on the jukebox was classic country, Johnny Cash and Willie Nelson scratching out harmonies, unless anyone had a spare quarter. Then it'd spill out the music by the decade. The drinks were simple, and everything on the menu was cooked in the one deep fryer, beige with a side of ketchup. You could drink water from the tap and just hang, or sit quietly pickling your liver at the bar. No one much cared what you did, least of all the owner. Mickey Plemmy was exactly who'd expect to own a bar called Mickey's Bar. The sort of guy who lived in a small one-bedroom apartment above it, who only saw the sun through the windows. Mickey was the type of guy who'd you'd wa- who'd watch you quietly as you gave him your order without needing to know anything about you. He was the sort of person your eyes ran over, taking in only the big details. How he wore only black t-shirts and dark blue jeans, how he'd only smile a half grin, and only when people weren't looking at him. Mickey had spent his life shuffling his heavy feet behind the bar. He knew every bump in the counter's wood, every dent in the linoleum. He knew the flickering pattern of every light and when they were about to blow. He knew how to stack the glass bottles of liquor in front of the cloudy mirror so they didn't topple. He knew how many people could be inside the bar talking and laughing before he had to adjust the music level. He knew that on Fridays, the boys playing pool in the corner needed a pitcher every half hour. He knew the kids who'd grown up from their first drink to the hard faces lining the stools every night. He was Mickey's Bar. Mickey stocked the bar on Mondays. The delivery van would pull up, and he and the driver would carry the boxes into the small alcove behind the back door. They always shook hands before the driver climbed back into the cab and drove away. And Mickey always took a second before opening the back door and hauling the boxes into the storeroom to let the sun warm his face, to heat the blackness of his t-shirt so he could carry the sun with him all day inside of the dark bar. When he was alone, he smiled differently. It was a smile that came from his insides. It gripped his face and spread it wide. Mickey knew this smile was scary, so he never showed it in public. But when he was alone, with the sun in the alley behind the bar, Mickey would smile his face spreading smile. As Mickey carried the last box into the back room, the door slammed behind him, letting in a small breeze. His arms strained with the weight. He noticed the drip, drip, drip of the pipe overhead was at it again. Brown water had sprawled over the beige linoleum floor in a mess. Mickey sighed into the shoulder of his t-shirt as he wiped the sweat off his face. He stepped forward and lost his balance. The box was too heavy, and it pulled him backward. He let go and tried to catch himself, only to slam the back of his head against the floor. Pain. He swore. Mickey tried to sit up, but couldn't. His heartbeat hurt in his chest. His breath whooshed in and out too fast. A curtain of black drew across his eyes. The sloshing brown water tickled his ears as it lapped against his lobes. Mickey groaned and tried to open his eyes. The light overhead hurt, so he squinted. It was cold on the floor. His skin was goose-pimpled. He tried to lift a hand to wipe his face, but found he couldn't move more than a couple inches out of the water. His body was too heavy. He felt the gentle rocking of the water, the floating haze, that summer afternoon feeling of drifting on your back in a lazy stream, watching the grass on the bank. Mickey had never floated in a stream before, but he'd read about it, and he just knew that this was what those writers were talking about. Feeling content. The sounds of the world muffled. Just you and your breathing and the water. Mickey lay in the brown pool of growing water, enjoying the contented way his body dragged heavy over rocks and dirt until he closed his eyes and everything went dark again. All right. I think that's a good start.
I think that's a great start. I would like to say that the story of Mickey's Bar really opens up into such a larger world as you read it. I don't want to spoil it, but it really does, because it is your longest story. You do really take your time to talk about different experiences and the different ways people deal with mental health, and just like young love and regrets, and just being reckless. And it's a really, really great story, and it is definitely your longest story in the
Yeah,
book.
it takes place over the course of a lifetime. So
Yeah,
it's long in terms of words, but also in terms of time.
yeah,
And it's also told in multiple point of views, not just Mickey's. and it's just really fun. And it went to places that I didn't expect it to go. I didn't know Mickey would go on quite a journey when I started it.
When you set out to write this story, did you from the beginning want to like sit with it and have it be the long story? Or was it just something that kind of happened?
No, I knew it was going to be really long because I knew there was going to be a lot of characters in it, and
Mm,
that I wanted each one of them to go through a very specific journey. And I knew those journeys. Some of them were really short in the book, and then some of them were really long. So I knew it was going to be a longer story, and I felt like Mickey kind of deserved that. Like,
mm.
this is only a taste of who Mickey is, but you get to know him a lot more. And yeah, so he
Yeah.
deserved time.
Yeah, I mean the passage you read, you really do give us such a nice sense of who he is, just from just his mannerisms and how he deals with things and how attentive he is as a person, just dealing with like music level and people talking and stuff. It's really nice. I like it, and it was the story you could really sit with, like I said, because you've got and I would love to talk about your micro stories, but in the book, when you do pick up your copy, you will see that there are a few micro stories, and you know which ones they are because they're actually in gray in the table of contents, which is quite nice. Um, but before we get to that, I do want to talk about something else that's in this book, which is the content notes. And because your stories do talk about some darker subjects, like I mean, we already talked about mental health issues, you know, suicide ideation, harassment, violence. It's a dark collection. It's a dark, dark one.
Yeah, there's murder.
There's, well, of course.
There's darkness in it. I mean, when I feel like that's just who I am, and I was really committed to like just showing who I am as a person, and I am like light, but I am also dark, pretty dark, and funny. I think like I like the combination of all that together.
Yeah.
Um, and so I wanted to write stories that were maybe a little bit more unexpected from someone like me. I feel like when I walk through the world, people perceive me a certain way. And I mean, it's not always like the fullness of who I am. Um, and my mind does tend to run to these dark places. So I really did want to capture that in my stories.
Yeah. And I know that when you're reading, you do seek out the little more disturbing, darker things. Like, I mean, it's in your synopsis, Chuck Palahniuk. There's a big name right there.
One of my very
Uh,
favorite writers of all time. Yeah.
yeah, so I mean, and I mean, it was, of course, were you thinking about his work, and when you were writing these, were you thinking about what he had done and maybe
Uh,
wanting to pay homage to it, or maybe go a little further than he's gone?
I don't think I could ever go further. But I mean, he's definitely a writer. I've read most of his books, and it's just someone I admire for their minimalistic sort of take. I don't feel like I'm a minimalist writer, but I do enjoy that.
Mm,
I enjoy that simplicity of it. So um, yeah. But I mean, on the other hand, I really like Michael and Ondaatje. Like I really like those full words too, and those full sentences and all that beauty. So I don't know. I didn't consciously think of any writer stories or anything. I just
okay.
sort of just like, and plus this book was written over the course of like I don't even know, like 9 years, like 8 years maybe. Like it was a long time that I spent writing these stories. Like
I do want to say, yeah, to anyone out there watching that is a writer, there's no golden path to getting published.
no.
And I do want to say one of the first pieces that I've ever read of Fran's was in a workshop in 2013, and that story is in this book. It's Pornorama, one of the best titles ever, Pornorama. Um, yeah, I remember reading it, and when I read it again in the collection, I felt like it fit perfectly with all the other stories in here. And I also, because it had been so long since I had read it, I was revisiting it again, and I remember feeling, I'm like, I remember these feelings about this character and what she was going through. Um, so, I mean, we could talk about that. I mean, some of your older stories that are in here, Pornorama is one of them.
Pornorama is one of them. And there's a story in here called 13 Steps,
Mhm.
and it was one of the very, very first short stories I have ever written, like
Yeah.
ever. So before that, I'd been focusing on like poetry and like trying to write novels and scripts and stuff. And then I was like, I'm going to try this short fiction thing. And I tried 13 Steps, which is in this book. And oh my God, that must have been like that was such a long time ago, at least 10 years ago. And I tried so hard to get that story published. I sent it out to so many places and nobody wanted to publish it. Everybody liked it, but they didn't know how to publish it. They didn't know what to do with it.
Mhm.
And that was like their comments, like, it's a really great story. We love the writing, but we don't know what to do with it. And I was like, okay. And then so when I was putting out my own collection, I was like, well, I like it, so I'm gonna put it in.
That's
Um,
right. Yeah. I think we should talk about that because I mean, one thing I'd love to talk to you about is form, because
yeah,
13 Steps is one of the stories where you really experiment with form.
yeah.
And I'll explain that 13 Steps, there are two, let me see if I can show it to them to give them a sense of what I'm talking about here. There are two narratives happening side by side in that story. So when I was reading it, I actually, as a reader, had to make a decision about how I wanted to read it. And I think, so here's the first page of 13 Steps. As you can see, there are two columns. And that is how the entire story is presented in two columns, two narratives, two different times for the same character. And this is one story that does that. You do play with form with other stories. You have breaks. Some of the pieces are like poems. Like I feel like your micro stories, you could read it as a prose poem, one long prose poem, one could say. Um, so yeah, do tell me when you were writing 13 Steps and these other pieces that were playing with form, did you think about the form first, or did that sort of come to you?
I think um it's really hard to tell which came first, the form or the story. But I think that maybe like maybe a second before would be the story. Like for 13 Steps, it was I'd heard a song by Johnny Cash, Hung My Head, and it's all about a young man who goes out one morning and shoots a stranger and then gets executed. He doesn't know why he did it. And I was like, what? Like, oh my God, I want to go into the head of that character. And so I wrote 13 Steps and I was like, okay, well, I know that it ends with him being hung. And um, so I was like, okay, so I know it ends with him being hung in the morning. And then I like looked up like old fashioned execution by hanging, like what was it? What did it look like? And then it was you had to take 13 steps up
Hmm.
to the like platform to get hung. And I was like, whoa. And I was like, okay, 13 steps. All right, 13 paragraphs. And so I was like, I'm going to tell the story in 13 paragraphs as if the character's walking to his own execution. And then and I was like, well, do I tell the present or do I tell the past? And I was like, well, I'm going to tell them both at the same time, because I felt like as a character, like if I was sitting in a cell and I knew I only had minutes until I was going to be dead, my thoughts would be everywhere. I'd be in the present moment, but I'd also be in the past at the same time. Like I don't think I could come out of that. So this character, I had him sitting in the present moment in one column and then sitting in the past going through the crime he committed in the next column. And so my idea was that a reader could either read it all in the present, they could read it all in the past, or they could go back and forth between the two to sort of like mirror his own state of mind. Um, and so that's why I have that sort of structured that way. And then it was just very much on that. And they used to say like when you got hung that it was a long drop in the morning air. So I sort of just like kept
That's
that
that's
story.
beautiful and horrifying.
I know. So
Yeah.
that's one reason why I like structured that the way it is. And then the other stories that I play with structure, I really love when a story structure complements the story and
Mhm,
complements the characters and like
mhm.
what they're going through. So I had like mentally, so for sure throughout I have different structures if it mirrored like what the character needed to
Mhm.
tell the story.
Yeah, I feel like in particular there's the stories where you have the complex 2676. That is a series of stories about people living in an apartment complex and how their lives kind of knock up against each other.
Yeah.
But the way the stories are structured is that each section is literally the name of the number of their apartment.
Yeah.
And we kind of go back and forth between this little cast of characters, and it creates this kind of isolation in a sense, but also this forced interaction. And people are sort of interacting with each other or experiencing each other in terms of where they live in the like physically where they live in the building too.
Yeah.
And I found that really engaging. So that I mean I love all the stories, but that one was another one where I found form actually really helped the story give me a almost sensory feeling around the story.
Yeah, and the elevator in that story is almost like its own character,
Yeah.
because it takes them from level to level. All the characters have some moment in the elevator, and it's sort of just like that, like, backbone of that story. Um, and again, I wanted to do that one multi-point of view because I just love multi-point of view stories. They're really fun to write, first
Yeah.
of all, and then second, I just like reading them. So, yeah.
Um, were there any stories that um, where the content or the topic was difficult that you had to grapple a bit with what you were trying to say?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Uh, yeah. There was a few stories that are based on my own life experience.
Mhm.
Um, for example, in the book, there's a story called Who is Eric? And that story, without giving too much away, is about a girl who moves to the city and has a peeping Tom who masturbates outside of her window. And then how that sort of warps her sense of who she is and who she becomes. And it really, really deeply affects her. When I moved to the big city, I had a masturbator at my window, and it scared the living daylights out of me, obviously, and it was really traumatic. And the moment that I have right at the top of that story where she calls the police and the police blame her because she's the one who left her blinds open and
Mhm.
not the masturbator happened to me.
Mhm.
When I called the police and they came and they yelled at me for leaving my blinds open. Um, and I was like, "What? Like, I'm not the person, like, what?" So,
Yeah,
that's
I think
yeah.
that it really speaks to the climate of today. I think a lot of people are grappling with this idea of blame, victim blaming in particular. And I think that in that particular story, even though it is a shorter story, you don't look away. And I think that's really important that you kind of stare at what's happening and you force the reader to sort of stare at how that affects this character.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think that one I think I can imagine would have been hard to read, particularly now that we know it was based on your life, an experience you had in your life.
Mhm.
Um, and I know there are others that you have that were inspired by real life.
Oh, yeah, for sure, Pornorama. I
Hmm.
worked in a porn store, as the same age as the character, and the experience she goes through is an experience that I went through. And I just feel like for me, especially as, like, a younger writer, it was easy for me, or not easy, it was the way that I worked through some of these, like, traumatic events in my life was to fictionalize them and sort of place them into this fictional universe that I've created. Um, so I have, like, my reality, my real world, but through all of my stories, I am crafting a fictional universe, like a parallel universe, just slightly off from my own. And
Yeah.
that's sort of like this place where I set all of my stories. Um, so if you ever see similarities or through lines or whatever, that's because it's all set in this like parallel to us universe. So for me, it was easy and is still easy for me to take some of my own traumatic experiences and then put them into that universe and have other characters working through them and making different choices than I made. And yeah, so you'll
Yeah,
see that throughout this
that's
book.
nice. Yeah, that's nice that in a sense you're reconciling it in a way that is a little bit more you have control over
Yeah.
what happens in the situation. And I do want to mention that you do write nonfiction. You have some really lovely essays out there in the world. um, and it is interesting to hear as a nonfiction writer myself, how that you can use fiction to help you through some of the harder stuff that you may not want to write about, in terms of like a memoir, or you just need to work it through, and maybe you'll cool it down to the point where you can.
Yeah, I feel like the things that I write about in my fiction are things that I just don't have any care to write about in my nonfiction.
Mhm.
I feel like my nonfiction voice is very different than my fiction voice, which is very different than my poetry voice. Um, so it's almost like all the different aspects of who I am get their own genre.
They get their own little piece of you. Yeah, yeah, I've read your poems, and you're right. Yes, you do have very different styles. You do talk about different things. Your poems are very autobiographical. So it was really nice to see what your brain is when it comes to fiction, and um, every single story is different. I'll say that. Like, um, I couldn't expect what was coming in the next stories. But I do want to talk about the micro stories,
Yeah,
and how they perhaps inform the collection or inform each other.
the micro stories. I'm very interested what people take away from them when they read them. Um, that was like in my mind, the micro story. Well, I don't know if I want to give it away though.
Well, don't then. Let the listeners buy their copies and see for themselves.
The micro stories are, I don't know. Maybe I'll read one. I'll read one.
Let's read one. Yes,
Okay.
let's do that.
Okay. So okay. The micro story. Okay, I'm gonna read a micro story called "Every Drop from the Faucet is Gold." I mean, no offense when I read this story to those who are listening. Maybe a little bit of offense, but not a lot of offense. All right. The future. It looks like the desert has swallowed the entire earth. Gasping mouths inhale the hot, thick air, longing for a drop of moisture to calm their swelling tongues. That's what I see in my dreams. These aren't nightmares, these are predictions. I know you think that sounds fake, that I'm making something up, but I assure you, it's all true. When you turn on the tap, I bet you don't even think about all the water that you waste. How much water do you really need to wet your toothbrush? A few drops, maybe? How much do you actually waste down the drain? Too much. How many glasses of water do you pour but never finish? How many times had you let your kids water the driveway or the sidewalk or the fucking decorative stones you have lining your lawn? How much water has your child wasted? At night, I wake up in a world without the luxury. Yes, what we have is a fucking luxury of water. I see your kids, the same ones you let water the pavement. I see those kids as bleached bones. They'll all die, you see? Your kids will fucking die because they don't have enough water and you don't fucking care. No one cares. No one. Not even me when I take a bath and then just let the water drain. Not even me when I let my mind wander as I overfill a pot and I have to pour some out. Not even me when I make tea that I don't drink, or when I wash my hands and let the water swirl around my fingers for a few seconds more than necessary, or when I flush 2 times because there's a tiny scrap of paper lingering in the toilet bowl. In my dreams, as I crawl through the barren world we have created, I think back on all the water wasted in my life and I curse every single fucking one of us. So,
Yeah, I when I read that one, I felt a lot of things. I felt a lot of shame, and I mean, it made me think about, yeah, I waste a ton of water. Yeah, I do. And then I think as the character turns it on themselves, it's
yeah,
like, I too am flawed and make mistakes and have regret, and it's great, and that's just a taste of one of the micro stories. And I think one wonderful thing about these stories is the voice is still very strong. The voice has a lot of emotion. The voice has a lot to say,
yeah,
and it just kind of comes out in this kind of unfiltered, almost like verbal scream, like this, like I'm screaming onto the page, and you had better listen. And yeah, I really love those stories. I really love the micro stories. I think that story really lends well to. We got an early question from a friend of ours, a friend Taylor, and Taylor wanted to ask you, can you speak to how you find joy in art in a world whose injustices are real and imminent?
I mean, it's hmm, that's a good question. I feel like for me, art is definitely a way for me to escape when I need to escape. It's also a way for me to confront when I need to confront the issues in myself, like how I'm contributing or how I'm not contributing, and then also have the ability to throw it back on whoever's looking at my art. Um, and for me, I seriously do love writing. It is joy for me. It makes me really happy, and when I get on a new story and I'm totally jazzed and I'm in it, it just I used to call it being in the flow of the universe because it just feels like pretty effortless and really just really fun. Like I just really enjoy doing it. Um so I just feel like I'm allowed to enjoy that kind of stuff even though the world is going to shit and I know that. Um
Yeah.
because I think about like what if there's a world or a time in the future where people aren't allowed to have joy or the world just becomes too hard to even let that in, but I don't even know if that's possible. But I just like want to take advantage of the time that I guess I have now. um but I mean there's dualities, so you can still be joyful in art while at the same time being considering the bigger picture. You can do both at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of art, um, be it writing, be it visual art, um, it's a way of working things out. And I think a lot of people practice things for their own sake of self-care. I mean,
Yeah,
as a writer, I do struggle with. I mean, it can feel really, really awful to write sometimes, particularly on the days where it's the complete opposite of what you're saying, where the words just don't want to come.
yeah,
But one thing as a writer, I ask myself every day, particularly on the hard days, is that what if I was told I couldn't write anymore?
yeah,
How would I react to such a choice or such an ultimatum? And I think that finding joy in art is particularly important given what's going on now. And I think it, given like all, I mean, the tragedies that have been happening. Just, I mean, yesterday we saw something particularly awful. To find ways to express ourselves in whatever form it comes out, and your stories do express that in its own way, while also forming it and massaging it into something new, so that there is that space and that distance, but
yeah,
also the, like you said, the permission to feel. And yeah, I mean, and again, it does, you do go through those days where you feel like, how important is this? But it is important. And I think this is the point of why we're talking about it, is because
yeah.
it is important. And there are people here agreeing with us, absolutely. Oh, there's a really nice question here
Okay.
from one of our listeners, Rachel. Rachel asks, how do you take care of yourself when you're writing a challenging piece?
Good question. I would say I give myself a time limit, honestly. So, if I know I'm going into writing something that's gonna make me feel deep feelings, then I don't let myself sit there for very long. Maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then I'm done for the day. Like I'm done. And I just make myself walk away. Um, and go do something else for the rest of the day, because I personally just can't sit there in it for a super long amount of time. And if that means it takes me a really long time to write the piece, that's fine with me. I have all the time in the world. I'm not on a time limit for anything. So set a time limit and then go leave and I'll go do something completely different for the rest of the day.
And yeah, and then you feel like you can get back to it maybe the next day
And then I
or
just feel like it, and then it's manageable for me. And I
mm,
let myself feel what I'm feeling it. Like I I definitely have had days where I just am crying while I'm writing. Or
mm.
maybe I write one sentence and the rest of the time I'm just like crying and feeling it. And then that's fine for
It's
me.
incredibly cathartic to cry while you're writing.
Uh,
I have had my moments where I'm writing something and I can feel it and I'm like I can't stop. I need to let it come out and then sit and think about why I felt that way when I was writing. And I think that's a good reason why we write too. It's to sort of get to a point where we have to consider things we maybe have been pushing down or didn't even realize we were pushing down until it starts coming out on the
yeah.
page.
I should
Um,
also mention that I do therapy and I talk to a therapist a lot about what I'm writing and like how I'm writing it and why I'm writing it and if I should continue writing it and like so I'm bouncing it off of a objective third party who is trained to deal with that stuff, especially when it comes to autobiographical stuff or like the memoir. And I have zero problem with putting a project away for like a year or two until I'm ready to come back to it emotionally and like and I have a plan worked out with my therapist about like what I'm going to deal with first and what I'm going to write next.
that's really good. I think that's great that you talked about that because yeah, this stuff can be really really harrowing.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, people who do have access to mental health resources like therapy or I mean, be it online or in person, can really help you. I mean, has it helped your writing to talk to your therapist?
I mean, it's helped me be okay with the stuff I'm writing sometimes. Uh
Mm,
for sure like it's helped me I mean, it does help though cuz I can just cuz not everybody in my life wants to just sit and listen to me ramble about some like a story I'm working on and trying to figure out like I would rather have someone, I guess, who's paid to be there, so I don't feel like I'm burdening them, like, it's their job, and they're paid to listen to me talk about this thing endlessly, and I don't feel bad about it.
I wanna talk a little bit more about the process. Um, so I mean, talking to your healthcare provider, your therapist is a great way to work through things. Do you talk to a writing group? Have you ever had like a group where you can do criticisms? I mean, outside of course, we did workshops in school,
Yeah.
and you and I do sit together. I mean, let's be transparent here. Fran and I have an accountability meeting every morning where we sit, we say hello on a chat like this, and then we mute each other and we just write. But sometimes we share and sometimes we don't. It's just a productivity tool. But do you have trusted readers? Have you had trusted first readers for this book?
Um, trusted first readers for this book, I mean, some of these stories were workshopped in school,
Hmm.
some of them weren't, some of them were just written and sent off to editors and things like that. Um, I would say, like, at the beginning of my career, my family, but now I just don't really wanna bother them with that kind of thing, and so, as of now, no, I'm just sort of, like, trusting myself, and it's working out okay. And then I'm also just, like I just really wanna be, like, acknowledge people's time, and
Yeah.
so I don't really want to, burden people with having to do this, like, labor if they're not being paid for it, which is why I would rather just give it to an editor that I'm working with whose job it is. Um, and I should shout out my editor, Brian. Um, he was awesome. Picked up the book from the slush and really helped me form these stories and get them in a really good working order and sort of polish them and just make them really great. So thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Brian. And there's a heart from Brian. Um, I really liked Whitney had a nice little comment here. Yay to normalizing mental health supports. I, yes, 100%. I think writers and artists tend to exist in a sort of vacuum, black hole area when they're writing, and it can really suck you in. particularly stories like these. So I'm really glad that you talked about that, because it's important. Self-care is so important, no matter
Oh,
what
it's
you
super
do.
important.
Um,
Or else you won't come back to the page every day,
there you go. Yeah,
right? Yeah. If you
yeah.
don't feel safe there, you won't go back there. So
I like that. That's a quote. That's a quotable, Fran. You better write that down and put it on your website. That's great. Um, uh, did your work? I would love to just at least mention your work as an art like a art facilitator and educator. Did any of your time in those communities or working with those students inspire anything in the book?
no. That's terrible,
Okay,
but
that was
I
just
mean,
my that was just my way to mention that you do education, art
yeah.
education.
No, that's like a total, like, that's like a different part of my life, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have fun doing it. It's one of the pure joys of my life is going to different reserves and teaching kids writing and art and just hoping to inspire them to like continue in the arts.
Hmm.
But I do that for me for the pure joy of it because I really love it. And the kids are super inspiring. I guess they do inspire me to just like take risks maybe or to have fun and just be like whatever, like it's just for practice. Like I tell them all the time like all these things like just do it. It doesn't matter. You can throw it away later. Like just practice, have fun. And so maybe in that way, yeah. But in terms of like the content, no.
Okay. Yeah.
Uh,
Um, the kids know that you're a writer, and I'm sure they know that you've written, that the story collection is out there in the world, and they can see what teacher Fran has got in her brain.
some
Um,
stuff, yeah.
uh, Speaking of fun, I mean, were there any stories in particular that were the most fun to write?
Spectre Sex was.
Okay, let's talk about Spectre Sex. Again, great title. You've got some great titles in this collection.
Yeah, I
Spectre
kind of
Sex.
lucked out with that, hey? Like I agree. I was like, man, I'm typically not that great with titles, so I was like, whoa, they just happen to be really great. I don't know.
Tell us about Spectre Sex and why it was so much fun.
Spectre Sex, it's okay, so this story has a really funny origin. I was like watching TV I don't know, I was watching some sort of digital platform and up popped like a little interview with Kesha,
Yeah, okay.
and she had mentioned that she has sex with ghosts. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. And then I did some Googling and found out that a lot of people have sex with ghosts. And I was like, well, do the ghosts have any say in this? Like, who's advocating for the ghosts? Are they being like pulled into this in a ceremony that they have no control over? Because if so, that's not super fair to the ghosts. And then my mind just sort of went off on a tangent of like the ghost point of view and being beaten down in this job where he has to go have sex with women every night and like anyways, and so I just got really into the mind of this ghost and when I really wanted to advocate for the ghost's rights after I heard this interview. And so it's really fun to write, to create this whole world and to imagine that this is like really what it is. And to me, that story felt very cinematic. Like it felt like, oh, this could be a really funny short film or something, like because I could see it all in my mind.
Yeah, not to give anything away about Spectre Sex, but it's an organization of ghosts
Yeah. Yeah.
that do different things. And yeah, that one was definitely fun to read, because yeah, you don't really think about the agency of the spirit when it comes to the things that they do or that we summon them to do,
Yeah.
via a Ouija board or seance or what, a ritual in the woods, what have you. That one was definitely fun. So I'm glad that you had fun writing that one. Um, I think I would love to hear one more reading from you.
Sure. I picked a story that I know you like, Nadine.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. And this one's also fun for me. So this one is again another one that sort of plays with structure a little bit. It's told in just sort of these like numbered paragraphs I can so anyways, this story is called Love Transparent. 1. You thought the fly was still alive because it kept pulsating. No, squirming over the white of the laminate floor. But when it get closer, you realized it was only moving because of the maggots pushing their way through its corpse. White bodies were squeezing through the cracks in the flesh like dozens of blackheads popping at once. You yearned to lean closer, to put your ear against the tiny stomach cavity, hear the crunch as they broke through. But you kept still, watched from where you'd laid down on the floor as they inched their way towards you, your body too heavy to move and meet their wiggling bodies in their forward crawl. 2. In high school, I would spy on him as he sprinted across the cement behind the school. He would wait to emerge from the rusty back door until everyone had gotten bored of waiting for him, and then he would pump his legs and streak, like a multicolored universe, across the thick pad that penned us in all day. I hid and watched because of his translucent skin. You could see through it like it was a Vietnamese shrimp roll. The lettuce and carrots of his inner workings were constantly in motion, quivering, expanding, living. He was like a little rabbit out of its den, trembling with fear, and for good reason. There were always kids waiting for him somewhere. They would beat him, turning his skin from clear to deep red as vessels broke, blood blooming like flowering tea. Bruises would spread over his translucent forehead like ink spilled on satin. It would feather at the edges. 3. You felt the heart from the inside. You had to cut lower than you expected you'd need to. You cut under the rib cage. Through the elastic skin there, you pushed and pushed and pushed. You broke the diaphragm. You kept going. You let the miniature flashlight strapped to your wrist guide you through the web of veins and arteries. You moved between the lungs, which had stopped inflating and deflating. It was slippery, because our insides are slippery, and it was warmer than you'd expect, but you found the heart eventually. It's firmer than what you thought it'd be. You ran your fingers over it, squeezed it. The pooling thickness of the blood stayed under your nails. All right. That's a little taste of Love
A little
Transparent.
taste of
You'll have
what
to
could
read the rest of it.
that's right. That could be one of my favorites in the collection. It's a really beautiful. It's very vivid and romantic and grotesque, and I won't give any more away. But yeah, the language in that one felt particularly poetic, and I felt that it served the voice because the person is looking at this in a very kind of rose-colored glasses kind of way. So yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much for to reading those three pieces, those three excerpts. I do want to ask one big question, the question that everyone always asks. Do you have any advice for anyone out there who is working on a short story collection?
I mean, I don't know if my advice is good advice, but I guess I could give advice. I would say for me, it's sort of like coming up with an idea and like a feeling for the collection as a whole. Like, what do you kind of want it to say as like as a unit, as like a thing? I think that helps when it comes to like picking the stories you're going to put in it and like the thorough lines that you're going to put throughout the stories. Um, I mean, like, yeah, so I had this collection here about like sort of choice and stuff, and then I'm working on a new collection which is dealing with the afterlife. So all the stories are set in the afterlife. I had a collection. You had mentioned that you noticed that two of the stories in here have characters that are in both the stories.
Yeah,
So there's like Pornorama and there's a story called Glitter Like Herpes.
yes.
Um
Those titles, Fran.
one of the characters from Glitter Like Herpes, her name is Michelle, and she was in Pornorama, and so then she made her way into her own story. So there was
Mhm.
a time where that those stories take place in Fort McMurray, Alberta, where I lived for a while. when I went to college. And um, there was a point in time I wanted to set a whole collection of Fort McMurray because I found it to be a very surreal place to live. Um, and I was like, oh, this is like the perfect environment for these stories. And then I had to scrap it because um, the wildfires came and decimated the community. And I just felt like I couldn't set my stories there anymore, considering they were all set with the backdrop of a fire that comes and destroys the community.
Mm,
I was like,
mm.
okay, I can't write that anymore. Like, I'm just gonna push that to the side. But I really loved the two stories, like two, like those two. So I was like, I can't lose those two stories. They're so good. So then I brought them in here because they both deal with choice. And I was like, okay, like I can fit them in. But again, so it was like a collection that sort of like deals with, I don't know, that's for me though. Maybe
Well,
that doesn't make sense for anybody else, or they want to
I
throw that
think
away.
that I think that's a nice way of looking at it. I mean, it's the idea. I mean, I think that's something that writers go through is when a project doesn't work anymore, can
Yeah.
you salvage things from it? Are there kernels that can work in other forms or in other ways? And you've done that with those two stories, with Pornorama and with Glitter Like Herpes. Um, who are both, I mean, Michelle is, when people read it, I think they'll see that Michelle is quite the strong, almost frustratingly so strong character. And I'm glad that she's made her way into this collection. Um, so I want to just say we've come up to the hour. We've come up to the hour, and Fran, is there anything else you'd like to say before we say good night?
Is there anything I want to say? I don't know. I don't know. I hope you enjoy it. I hope that when you read this book, you're not like freaked out or think that I'm a weirdo or anything, but that you just enjoy it for the pure fun of it. Um, and I will say that there are moments in this collection, little lines or little tidbits that I took from listening to people on the street. Um, and so I don't know, be wary of what you say in front of people. You know, some people have really weird conversations when they're waiting in
Mm.
line for things. So some of that stuff has made it into the book where I was just like listening to people talk. I'm like, holy crap, like what are they talking about? I just started jotting down what they're saying because it's so weird and surreal. And I was like, that's perfect.
So beware, you may see your words end up in a story one day. The exact thing you were complaining about ends up in a story. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if anybody happens to have any more questions, I'm totally like able to answer them. But if not, that's totally cool. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm gonna be doing more events and stuff uh throughout the summer and the spring. Uh
Oh,
what is your
a
revision?
question actually came in. If you'd like to answer it
Yeah, yeah.
about your revision, what is your revision process? And does
Uh,
it change based on the story?
Actually it kind of does. So there's some stories that come out almost like done. Like I'm like, okay, I'm done. Like maybe, I'll send them or give them to the editor and they'll go over, do some grammatical changes and like those tiny things, but like there's no substantive edits that
Mhm.
are needed in my mind anyways. Like I'm like, no, this is like the character's voice, like it's the story. Like Asleep Till You're Awake, um, that again is based on a moment, like just a flash of a moment that I had in a waiting doctor's waiting room where I came out of the waiting room and I thought I saw my dead mom. Like my mom had died a few years earlier. And this woman was her exact doppelganger. And I was like, and it's sort of like I couldn't believe it. And then when I like released my breath, I realized it wasn't her. And then I rushed home and I sat down. I remember so clearly I sat down in my backyard with my computer and I just wrote that whole story. And then that story has stayed almost the exact same from when I wrote it. Because it was just like, I don't know, it's just like a charged moment. So in terms of like that, there wasn't a lot of revision, but then some of the stories were revised over and over and over and over again. Um, and that revision process is just me reading them a million times out loud, um, like on the page, giving them to editors, seeing what they have to think, putting them away for years at a time. Sometimes that's what it needs. A story needs to just be put away for a few years and coming back as a better writer is a big thing. Like hopefully I'm only getting better. I think I am. But like having read so many more books, um,
Mm.
I think
Mhm.
like for me, reading really doesn't inform like um who I am as a writer and like getting better, I guess. So maybe I just haven't read enough before I can revise that story to know what I'm doing wrong. So I'll just put it away for a few years and then I'll come back to it.
So I guess what you're saying is there's no real rhyme or reason to how a story is going to become its final version. And to just let it happen as it happens, I guess. If lightning strikes, let
Yeah.
the lightning strike.
But and also just like don't be scared to let things sit, to let things marinate, to let yourself become better at your craft. Like there is no rush. Like I've been doing this for a while now, I would say. Like it's been at least, I don't even know, 15 years or something. And this is only my second book. Like I took a long time to like figure out who I was as a writer and my voice and to practice.
Yeah, I mean it's going back to the main theme of the book. It's all about choice. It's all about the choices we make, right?
All
Yeah,
with the choices. And I'm not in any rush for anything.
I think that's a great attitude.
Yeah.